Tonight on Reality Check, the cascading demand for an acceptance of farm loan waivers is in certain circles being seen as a moral hazard. Is this double standards given that those same critics rarely make the same arguments about corporate debt when that's written off? The debate has been sparked by, of course, the most recent spate of loan waivers about which the RBI governor has said that farm loan waivers can lead to fiscal slippages, undue work on fiscal deficit done over the last 2 years. The FBI chief has also expressed similar concerns, saying that credit discipline breaks down when you waive off farm loans. Money will come in today because government will pay, but when we will give loans in the future, farmers will wait for the next election. Now, none of this, of course, has prevented the spate of waivers and subsidies from continuing after Uttar Pradesh's approximately 36,000 crore waiver. Maharashtra is lining up an estimated 35,000 crore waiver. Chief Minister Fadnavis has also planned to pay out 10,000 rupees to every farmer owning less than 5 acres of agricultural land. That payout may end up costing the state another 6,000 crore rupees. And today, of course, the centre in a cabinet meeting announced an interest subsidy to farm loans of about 20,000 crore rupees, all of which adds up to almost 1 lakh crore rupees. Now, Bank of America, in a much cited research report, says that, and it estimates that if this trend continues, that by the 2019 elections, about 2.75 lakh crores, or about 2% of GDP, will be written off as waivers to small and marginal farmers. Moreover, a number of reports which have studied the UPA's mega 2008 loan waiver found that waivers don't work. The World Bank says that the loan waiver scheme had no effect on productivity, wages or consumption, but led to an increase in defaults amongst borrowers that were previously in good standing. ICRIA also said generalized debt relief discourages prompt repayment in the future in the expectation that there may be much more waivers in the pipeline. Now, regardless, as I said at the outset, these voices rarely speak up at the moral or practical cost of corporate waivers. Why not the writing down of corporate debt? Why is that not a moral hazard? Now, according to the Times of India, which filed RTIs at the RBI, they found that commercial banks have written off 2.25 lakh crores between 2012 to 2016. This is according to the Times of India. Now, overall, if you look at the picture about whether farm debt is worse than corporate debt, let's just take a look at the numbers that we could find through our research. We found that the total number of corporate loans at the moment works out to about 28 lakh crores, of which about 18% is stressed, 5 lakh crores. Total farm loans, according to the government, is about 12 lakh crores, and the percentage of stressed debt is also roughly the same at about 17%. Joining me tonight to debate this, I have with me Dr. Arvind Virmani, former Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India, also former Executive Director at IMF, Yogendra Yadav, National President, Swaraj India, Abhay Emma, who's an economist and Director at HDFC Securities, and also Neelkant Mishra, Manager, Director and India Equity Strategist at Credit Suisse. Abhay Emma, if I can come to you first, do you believe that farm loan waivers do constitute a moral hazard? And if you do, why do you not have the same concern for corporate debt write-offs?
See, Srinivas, to begin with, I think you are comparing apples and oranges.
Okay.
If you have to compare the farm loan, which is an individual loan based on a certain security, then it would be comparable to, let's say, car loans. That is one difference, or personal loans for any household appliances that you buy.
Okay.
Secondly, the rate of interest on the two loans are different.
Okay.
Farm loans or agriculture loans are always subsidized, so the margin of recovery or error for the bank becomes very limited.
They're about 7% is what I know. The agricultural loans are generally capped at 7%.
And it is compulsory. You have to do a certain part of your, which is called the priority lending. You have to do a certain part of your loans in priority lending. So there is an inbuilt subsidy into that. But you have to understand these are individual loans against, whatever the security is there.
But when you say they're individual loans, sorry to head you off, Abhay, but when you say that individual loans, they are loans given for business activity. I mean, farmers are using those loans for farming, which is a business activity, but yet you would say that it is not comparable to corporate loans.
It's like saying that if I tomorrow take a loan for a car and use it as a taxi, it is also a commercial loan to that extent. And firstly, it is not priced as a commercial loan. So that is the big difference there. Okay. So that in itself, you know, when what you call an NPA or a bad debt is built into your profitability by the bank. So when you take a loan, you assume a certain part of it. That is why there is a margin. That is why the NIM, the net interest margin between the deposit and the loans, is somewhere 4.5 to 5%, which is much higher in the case of a corporate loan. So your capacity to take.
Okay, yeah, let me come back to you. Yogendra Yadav, you are shaking your head. You disagree. Why?
Number one, crop loan is a crop loan. It's not a loan taken for one purpose and used for crop. No, the farmer actually takes it for a business activity called crop, and they actually use it. So there is no misusing. It's not that you take it for one purpose and use it for another purpose. Yeah, we can call anything apples and oranges, but the simple fact remains that both these are loans taken by one set of individuals for a business commercial activity. And yes, in both cases, writing off has certain hazard. It has some consequences. It has effect on patterns of future loans and patterns of returns, etc. in future. And the same applies to businessmen, doesn't it? When they know that their loans can be written off, when they know that the terms that they signed on today can be revised 3 years later by using all kinds of pretexts. So why should it not have similar consequences for businessmen as well?
Okay, let me just get quickly a response from Abhay before I move on.
Just one small difference. Firstly, I don't think Mr. Yadav touched on the subsidy. Why should there be a subsidy if it is the same loan?
But moving...
That is one. Secondly, I don't think any bank announces en masse, okay, all corporate loans are written off. You know, that is the problem, because in that, if you take individually and selectively and decide, okay, this is why this is an NPA, why this needs, that's a different story. But if you make a blanket statement, all farm loans are all corp, then you're heading for a disaster, because then the person who's paying back his loan, why should he pay back his loan? It's unfair to the other guy who's taking the loan.
Okay, but when you say that it's not done en masse, if you look at the figures though, for the amounts of loans written down, and we just put that figure up on the screen, they are pretty large. Let me just bring in Neelkant Mishra here. Now, Neelkant Mishra, you as in Credit Suisse was the author of that famous series of reports, House of Debt, where you looked at the concentration of bad debt in just a handful of companies in corporate India, where you also made the point, did you not, Neelkant, that these were not just stressed assets for necessarily legitimate reasons, but there were also more murky reasons for this huge mountain of debt. And to that extent, then, would you say that it's unfair to only describe farm debt and farm loan waivers as moral hazard?
No, I think the moral hazard also creeps in from the perspective of the ability to execute. You know, most states, it takes almost 1.5 years to figure out who the beneficiaries of the farm loan waivers are.
Yes.
Right? And when you're doing these waivers, are you only dealing with farmers who are tilling their own land, or do you also have tenancy details? So if there is an absentee landlord, I mean, are you giving waivers to people who till someone else's land? So there are lots of execution-related differences which I would point out to when you're looking at corporate loans such as these.
I'm asking you for more of a big picture perspective.
I think when
at the moment I'm not going into the nitty-gritties of you know, how do you distinguish between different types of farmers and so on. I'm just saying that, do you see the same moral hazard when it both comes to corporate bad debt as well as to farm loan waivers?
I think that is one of the important reasons why this issue of corporate debt has not been resolved. Because if you write down the debt and don't change control, it creates a massive moral hazard, and which is why I think the government and the RBI have been reluctant to go after this. If you write down the debt and there is a change of control, so the business that took on that debt and had to and couldn't run it, that business loses control. I think then there is absolutely no moral hazard. The next time someone takes a loan, they know that if they don't repay, they'll lose control of the business.
Okay.
So I think with the recent RBI decisions, we are starting to progress in the right direction.
Okay, Dr. Arvind Virmani, now you were CEA at the time of the UPA's massive loan waiver in 2008. Now, tell us about that decision. Were you at that time as a member of the think tank, the body that ultimately decided on that waiver? Were you concerned again about the moral imperatives of what it would entail? And how did it work out finally, in your view?
Very briefly, first on the points made, I think I'll just point out the 2 or 3 valid points which I've just heard. One is that Mr. Yadav is right that there is a moral hazard in corporate forgiveness, and as the last gentleman has confirmed. Secondly, I think, I'm sorry, I missed his name. He's right that there's a fundamental difference between individual write-off and a public announced one. So the moral hazard gets magnified if there is a clear perceived political thing which is announced. Anyway, to move to what you said, really there too the decision was political. I mean, I can be very frank now, it's a long time ago. As chief economic advisor, I was not consulted at all, and we learnt about it in the budget. Everything else,
I see. That's interesting.
One knew about, but not this particular item. And of course, we, but there was a lot of discussion after the fact, obviously. And I will just briefly mention, then we can take up the individual issues. One, of course, is the issue of moral hazard, which we have discussed right now.
No, but
the second issue is really a welfare perspective, and
no,
we can discuss
Dr. Virmani, yeah, sorry, I don't want to cut you off, but I want to keep you on the 2008 waiver, because as I just read out that we had these assessments, one by the World Bank and one by ICRIA, which said that that 2008 waiver didn't actually help at all. It actually made things worse. Would you agree with that assessment?
So, what that assessment tells you is that the moral hazard issue is a real one, that really the gains from doing it in terms of productivity are not there. That's what the studies is how I interpret them.
Right.
That's why I said the second issue is the welfare aspect. So, the aspect which comes directly from this moral hazard issue is a correct one.
Right.
And the second one is welfare, and the third one is what is the objective. For example, if the objective is if the reasons for the problem is a decline in prices, then forgiving the loans is not the most efficient and effective way of doing it. So really that's the third aspect which they are looking at. What was designed to be achieved by it? Was it productivity? What was the objective? And they defined 2 or 3 objectives which they have taken up. It may not have been the government's objective, and said that no, none of these objectives was achieved.